Good evening and welcome to Bethel College. We are grateful to have so many of our alumni and friends with us tonight, as well as the family of Ray Weaver. I wanted to start this evening by giving you a brief background on how this evening came together. I've been in the alumni office for about 4 years, and I keep hearing these stories over and over about Ray Weaver and this man who taught with passion and enthusiasm and wit. And so then I got this word that his family wanted to donate his glass collection to Bethel, and his daughter was interested in debuting an anthem on the same evening. And I said, we've got to bring our alumni back together for a time to reminisce and tell stories. So that's how this came about. We jumped on the opportunity to get you back here and a time to walk down memory lane. So it's my honor to serve as the MC for this evening and take us on a walk down memory lane. To begin, I've asked Dennis Engbrecht to come reflect on Ray, his legacy, and his time at Bethel. Would you please welcome Dr. Dennis Engbrecht?
Well, I too welcome you to the campus of Bethel College and to tonight's recognition of one of Bethel's longtime and most endearing professors, Raymond M. Weaver. I've never said it quite like that before. It's always been Ray Weaver. Raymond M. Weaver, we are honoring tonight. Earlier this evening, members of his family, along with Dr. Chenoweth and a few others, gathered for a dinner. And there was a great deal of laughter and a great deal of reflection and a great deal of acquaintance with people that had not been seen long. Ray may have waited till he was 37 to get married, but his children and grandchildren made sure that they weren't going to wait that long. They have done very well, and the crowd has grown. Tonight we are celebrating a life well lived. Family members of Ray Weaver are joined by former colleagues, students, and friends to reflect on the man who impacted hundreds, probably thousands, of lives. Like many of you here tonight, I was a student of Professor Weaver's in his Perspective of Fine Arts class. It was a class every Bethel College student looked forward to with great anticipation. You see, Professor Weaver's students didn't know that he had been awarded the Gold Medal of Piano Excellence, the highest honor given by the American Conservatory of Music in Chicago. We did not have any sense of awareness of all the places where Professor Weaver had studied before he came to Bethel College: Northwestern University, Indiana University, Oberlin College, and the Juilliard School of Music in New York City. His students didn't know that he had studied under some of the finest performing artists of his time. And few of us were aware that in the 1920s he toured the East Coast with the famous Russian violinist Alexander Kaminsky, the personal musician of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. We hadn't heard that Professor Weaver once played an engagement honoring Jane Addams, the famous social reformer of the 19th century and the founder of the Hull House in Chicago. We did not know that when he was drafted in World War II, he continued to give concerts and served as a pianist for U.S. tours. What we did know about Professor Weaver is that he loved to teach. He loved his students, and he loved his Lord. Ray Weaver had the consummate heart of a servant, and that is the legacy that we are celebrating this evening. Raymond M. Weaver, a servant of God, a follower of Jesus Christ, a man pursuing the heart of his Lord and Savior with a contagious passion to perform and teach the fine arts. And I'm pretty sure that Ray Weaver would enjoy this evening. So I encourage you to enjoy the evening. It's my honor to introduce to you the 7th president of Bethel College, Dr. Greg Chenoweth.
A reflection to honor Ray Weaver. Bob Buford says in his book, Halftime, that the first half of your life you feel is the busiest time. You're the busiest person in the world, grinding out an education, building a career, often a family, holding forth in a multitude of community obligations. But the second half of life, he writes, is different. You shift from the frenetic activity into a one thing that matters most. Augustine had said that the beginning of adulthood is to ask the question, what do I wish to be remembered for? But I think a one thing kind of legacy is bigger than that. It's bigger than being remembered for something, because we can all be remembered for our quirks. A legacy, I think, is that one thing commitment. A legacy is about influencing those toward that one thing. So what do you suppose Ray Weaver's one thing was? What was it that made him a dream weaver? Well, for sure, Ray had the first half of his life like anybody else. In fact, he quite literally shared his first half of his life with Bethel's first life. Board minutes show he was one of the very first professors hired, January 1946, with classes to start later that fall. Being first of anything requires an entrepreneur's spirit. Jim Clifton, the chairman of the Gallup poll and author of the Entrepreneurial Strengths Finder, says that after looking at 2,500 entrepreneurs, there are predictable talents of people who start things like Ray did. They have confidence, creativity, determination, independence. They're knowledge seekers and relationship builders, risk takers, and of course, have a business focus. That biggest business focus was key, I think, probably even for Ray, because he started something that grew. Many, many students came, and the institution grew under his influence. Ray was an entrepreneur because he followed this sequence during his first half. In fact, through those 40s and 50s and 60s, he was so busy that while he created an arts program from scratch, he was often known to not even cash his paychecks, to leave them in the back seat of his car with ungraded papers. That's busy. But if Ray's life matches yours and mine, no doubt he awoke one day, maybe the 70s and the 80s, the second half. There was a real, invisible shift inside. It was a time to focus on one thing. Those moments are when legacies are born. In your imagination, sit with me in his class. It's a day in a course that Ray developed that the Bethel faculty determined so important that every Bethel student must take. No one would be considered fully educated until they took Ray's course. Look to the front, behind the lectern. In your imagination, there he is, holding forth on architecture, music, and sculpture. See him float to the left and to the right of the dais. In your animated imagination, you see him flamboyant and gesturing, his eyes flickering with light. In your imagination, with me, open the syllabus. What's on top? This class is called Perspectives in Fine Arts. Since you and I are college juniors, we are learning to appreciate modifiers, perspectives in fine arts. This professor, entrusted by all of his colleagues to teach all of the students, had a perspective. It sounds to me curious, like a one thing. In this class, you listen to him speak. I don't have his lecture notes, but I bet he tells us that the function of art is to provoke thought or emotion. It's supposed to do something inside of us, like the music that we'll hear tonight. But to provoke is work only halfway done. Scare tactics can do that. Art is invested with more purpose than that. What richer meaning, what grander ideal, what moral conviction does this bring to your life, this piece of art? In your imagination, look around the room, and some heads start to bow over their notebooks to capture his thoughts. Others look pensively, kind of into the middle distance, lost in thought because Ray has captured us. Ray continues teaching us. He says, whenever someone asks if you're creative, you only have one answer. You have to say yes, because he has a perspective. He has a one thing. We're made in the image of God, all of us. The gospel doesn't begin with the fall of humanity and into sin and end with the great battle between good and evil of Armageddon. It begins with God creating things that were good and creating humankind, which was very good, and ending with a promise that he will recreate what is broken into a new earth. Here in our class, in Ray's class, you notice that a student in the third row cracks open his Bible to read Genesis 1 in an art class. Ray didn't assign that, he inspired that. Ray jars your attention back to the lectern. He continues, everyone is creative because God made us in his own nature. He not only created things, but he still recreates things. God keeps recreating what's broken, and we do too. When we constantly recreate and we improve things and we start things, we rule over creation with the authority the Genesis account affords us. And some people see obstacles in their life, they shrug their shoulders and they hand off projects to people they think are more skilled. But Ray teaches us differently. It's a perspective of fine arts. Not here, not at Bethel. That isn't our perspective. We try, we start, we see it through because it is God's nature in us. And what would Ray think about this campus today? Would we carry his legacy? Would we be couriers of his one thing? Today, students live on their iPhones. And so an IT staff member made a smartphone app with QR codes. Campus spaces need new decorations, and so a physical plant leader selected objects with symbolic value while they're being decorated. Students love creating music, and so a faculty member built a recording studio on campus. Not all students can live on campus, and so faculty create online format programs. They're solving problems. They're taking initiative. They have the grit to see it through. They are creative. They're operating in their God gift, God's image in them. And so on this day, when we celebrate the legacy of Ray Weaver, it occurs to me he had to be part of this startup enterprise, and he had to throw himself into frenetic energy of a first half. Things had to get done. It was busy. But I think the message today is bigger than tasks accomplished. That's first half talk. His legacy, his second half, is there really is a one thing. There really is a perspective for art, because everything around us is invented. Everything. And it made him, imagine it, a dream weaver. I'm grateful for his legacy that does continue yet today. Welcome back, Emily Sherwood.
There are so many stories to tell about Ray Weaver. We thought probably the best format would be a video. So please turn your attention to the side screens for a mini documentary on Ray's time at Bethel College.
Good morning, Vivian.
Hello.
We're with Mrs. Ray Weaver. Professor Weaver was at Bethel College from the day it was founded until his retirement. And we want to talk today, Vivian, about a subject that I think you enjoy talking about.
Right.
And that's Ray Weaver. Who was Ray Weaver?
Well, I think you would say that Ray Weaver was a lover of all the arts. He enjoyed literature, art of all kinds, and he was a student of the arts. He never thought that he had learned it all. But he was also a performer in both organ and piano, beside, of course, being a father and a husband. So that's who Ray Weaver was.
Ray Weaver arrived with the very first group of professors in 1947. He was a known commodity to the founders of the school.
Ray's family was connected to Bethel even before it was founded. His wife, Vivian, her father, he was involved at the very beginning when they found this campus. He brought his construction company over here. They helped clear the trees. They helped grade things, put the roads in.
They needed somebody in music. They needed a person who could teach, and he had been a musician. When he went to college, he'd been a pianist for traveling quartets.
He was a Renaissance man in that he mastered a number of things. He was very strong technically. He had a mastery of the keyboard.
He would not play the piano, he would command the piano.
I love to talk about Ray. He was an eye-opener. I had never seen anybody play like that, all over the piano meaningfully, with purpose and style. I can still remember the time in one of his lessons, and he picked out When All My Labors and Trials Are O'er. He started toying around with it. Da 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 da. And he goes da 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 da.
He threw everything in but the kitchen sink, and everybody loved to watch Ray perform because he was just in heaven. I mean, he was just having so much fun when he performed, and he'd be all over the keys.
He was devising and arranging and showing me how to play around with a melody. I couldn't take my eyes off of him.
I was a music major and had to take lessons, and Ray was my professor for that. And I'm taking my piano lesson from him, and he was getting a little agitated. He was sitting in the chair next to me, and he finally just stopped me. He says, "No, Stephen, let me show you." And he literally got on the bench and slid me right off on the floor. And I'm sitting on the floor looking up at Ray, and he starts playing this piece. Nothing's on the page that he's playing except the melody. And he's just, and then he got done, he sat back in the chair, and I get up and sit down. He says, "Now do you understand?" I'm going, "No, I don't understand a thing you just did. I loved it, but I can't do that." And that was Ray.
You had to kind of watch out of the corner of your eye, because when he wanted to play something for you, he'd scoot right onto the bench. So you had to be prepared.
His chapel that he offered once a year was the most popular chapel time of any of the chapels here at Bethel College. He would stand up and talk, sort of mumble a little while, and then he would ask the students what songs they would like him to play on the piano. Some were hymns, some were classical pieces. He could play part of a symphony, Beethoven's Fifth or something like that, and he could play Onward Christian Soldiers, everything by memory. And they were the best attended chapels anytime. I don't think anybody took a skip when they knew that Ray Weaver was going to be the chapel speaker. He was probably called at that time, very early in his time here at Bethel, a legend in his own time, because he had such a unique personality.
The stories about him were legendary. You know, the story of his wife having to contact President Panabaker and say, "Ray needs a raise."
She thought he wasn't being paid, and she called the president and was really upset.
And Dr. Panabaker would say, "Vivian, Ray hasn't cashed a paycheck in a year." He hasn't, and found out that they were all just thrown into the back seat.
And here to come find out, he had several months worth of paychecks in the back of his car.
And he was that kind of a person, but his mind and his heart were in music and in art.
He was eccentric, but the kids loved him. I mean, everybody wanted to be in his fine arts class.
The class I took was the fine arts class that was infamous on campus. I think if you spoke to anyone on campus, they would say with a smile and with much respect that this professor was just the most amazing professor you could know. He was fun, he was energetic, he loved to learn, so he passed that on to his students to love to learn.
His love for learning just bubbles out of him, making it inspirational to the students. For example, his fine arts class.
Everyone had to take the fine arts class, and everyone was excited about it because we heard good things from upperclassmen about this unique individual, Professor Weaver. You know, I have a teaching degree and was a superintendent of schools, and I've never run across another educator quite like Professor Weaver. For instance, one of the things that, one of my first memories was coming to class, and teachers would always take attendance. Well, he'd start with the A's and go to the B's and the C's and the D's, and then, you know, he'd say, well, that's enough for today, we'll pick this up again tomorrow.
Some days he might start at the beginning, some days at the end, sometimes in the middle, sometimes he'd do a few and say, oh, that's enough of that, and move on. And so you just never knew what was going to happen in Professor Weaver's class, but it was always exciting.
He never moved slowly. He always moved fast. And he jumped from one thing to another. In his speaking, he would start a sentence, think about something else, interrupt that sentence, and start another sentence. That was just his way. He was so animated and so eager to pass his inspiration on to other people.
One of the things I remember about his perspective in fine arts is that we all learned the various roof lines of the various barns of North Dakota. What?
I always knew there was a gable, but I didn't know there was a box gable, a Dutch gable, a gambrel, a mansard roof. And so I would find myself just going down the road watching for certain kinds of roofs.
He got students to look at roof lines and see what kind of roof lines the houses had. That was important to him, and as he drove around, he would talk about what kind of a house that was and what kind of a house this was.
In the fine arts class, I teach the architecture, especially barns are included here in Indiana. We take pride in our barns, almost as much pride in our barns as in our house because of the rich soil in this section. We teach these elaborate mansard roofs, gable, gambrel, with weather vanes, cupolas, very fancy barns.
You know, he would jump from one topic to the next pretty quickly. From music to art to architecture to painting, sculpting, whatever. It was just a fast-paced, fun, kept your attention type of class.
What Ray Weaver was like was energetic, funny, a little scatterbrained, but he was great, brilliant man. So he made fine arts a fun thing, which could be a very boring thing.
You know, another thing that Professor Weaver used to tell us as students was, you can't see what you don't know. And we saw a lot, but we didn't know what it was until I took the class with Professor Weaver, and he told us how all of that fit together. When we came in as freshmen, we would look at buildings. Professor Weaver taught us to look at architecture. We would look at a painting on the wall. Professor Weaver taught us about line and shadows and shade, perspective. He taught us about art. We listened to songs. Professor Weaver taught us to appreciate music and all of the things that went into the music. So my fond memory of Professor Weaver is looking at life out of eyes for an appreciation of art.
I would say that the students that were in his fine arts class got a glimpse of what it means to be hungry for learning and to enjoy what you're exposed to.
I started watching him when I was 4 years old. He never stopped being a teacher. If you want the bottom line, if it weren't for Mr. Weaver, I wouldn't be here.
One of the things that stuck with me about Ray, and it really goes to his teaching style, it taught me when I went into education that if you are engaged and enthusiastic about your subject, you will engage your students, and they will be engaged as well, and they will want to learn because you are so thrilled with what you're doing. And if you can communicate that, the subject matter will come alive, and students, even if it's a mundane subject they care nothing about, if you're enthusiastic about it, they will become engaged.
I find myself looking at roof lines now. I find myself interested in going to art shows and going to museums where there is art. So yeah, he has had an impact on my life. And you know, he was a very sincere man. There was no phoniness about Ray at all. What you saw was what you got. He was nervous, he was impetuous, he ran around, he interrupted himself, but that was Ray. That was just the kind of man he was. And that has left an impact on my life too.
I believe the legacy of Professor Weaver has to do with the way he treated his students, his pedagogy. I mean, he taught in a way that inspired colleagues.
Every time you meet a student who had him, you just have a connection. And you can always tell a story and say, yes, 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 I remember those days, and things like that. So I think he impacted every single person he taught.
You know, I thought coming in as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old freshman that, you know, we could outrun, outpace, outwork, outplay, outsing. Nah, this guy was, he was untouchable when it came to energy. His, you know, his antics in the classroom on this particular stage. He was everywhere, and you couldn't not watch and couldn't not listen because you might miss something that was going to be extremely important or extremely funny. The thing that I remember about Ray was his energy. Just seeing him walk across campus make you tired.
When I think of Ray Weaver today, and I look around at our culture today, I think what we're missing is Ray Weaver. He had a gentleman's spirit, a peaceful spirit, be good to others, be kind, be gentle. I think that's missing in our culture today. You see a lot of things on TV that are funny, but they're not gentle, they're not kind, they're not of peace. And he had all the good qualities that we're missing today.
Given Ray's love for music and the arts, no evening in his honor would be complete without some music. Would you please welcome Bethel College's a cappella group Voices of Triumph under the direction of Dr. Joshua Franklin.